I'm Dave Ainsworth. I was born in 1948 in Bexley Heath, then Kent, now part of Greater London. I got 31 years of work out of an interview that actually took less than 60 seconds. First of all, I did have a very basic medical, just really to make sure that I could see and that I had 2 of everything. And then the interview, I got asked 2 questions. The first question was, if we were to offer you a job here, would you be prepared to join one of our trade unions? And I said yes. And the second question was, when can you start? You could walk in off the street at Fords and get an interview without any prior appointment. It really was that sort of place. They needed that sort of people, numbers, to man their production processes. No robots then. Everything that was done by hand.
My name is Mary Beamish and I was born 1922 in London Hospital. We always had a treadle machine. I can never remember not having one. My mum could cut out children's dresses with no patterns, and she was well known for the dressmaking. I was a very shy child, stupidly shy, and redden up the least little thing. I said to my mum, you come with me. Oh no, you're 14 now and you're left school and you're working. I want you to go on your own. Find your own job. When I got there, I got the job, and I actually started on my birthday, and that's got to be unusual because you should be celebrating, not working. First job.
I'm Fred Morrison. I live in Dagenham. I was, next step up from shunter was driver. And to get a driver's job, somebody either had to leave or somebody had to die. And I was next in line to be a driver when the next one went. Whether he died or whether he retired, I was the next one. So I was a spare driver. What I said, dead men's shoes. That was the job then. But wonderful little firm to work for.
My name is Larry Fernandez. I was born in Nairobi in Kenya in 1948, 62 years old. My interest was in chemistry, and so I applied for and got a job within 3 weeks with a paint company in Barking, and stayed with them for a couple of years before moving to Berger Paints, where I spent the rest of my career. I started in the analytical laboratory, so obviously we were analysing paints and using a number of different chemicals. We made paint, different types of paints, industrial paints, household decorative paints, car paints. The company employed quite a number of people. It was also an international company, so I think worldwide there were quite a few thousand employees.
I was born in Queen Mary's Hospital at Stratford in October 1932, and my parents were then living in Parker Street in Silvertown. I had an interview at the Standard, and of course then when you filled in your application form, on it was, had you had any relatives live there? I had an aunt still working there, and my father had worked there. My mother worked there before she was married. Two of my father's sisters, my grandfather worked there, so the Davy family had all worked in the Standard at some time during their lives. They just accepted me, gave me a job in the cable part, and I just came home and packed up, and then I started there in the September of 51.
My name is Jeff Hamov. I am 59 years old, and I was born in the East End at 117 Whitehorse Lane. In them days it was very hard to get a job being disabled, and my disablement resettlement officer, who was based in the job centre, recommended Remploy, and so I joined the Remploy organisation, and I'm based down at Remploy Barking, and I've been there for 29 years. Remploy is an organisation where they not only teach people how to do a job, it's a community and a setup where disabled people have a well-being. Remploy do all different types of stuff, ranging from e-cycling to their electronics division and safety equipment for the military.
Well, my name's John William Atkins. I was born in 1940, worked for the South Eastern Gas Board for 13 years. Best part half of Greenwich have worked there, down there in the East Greenwich, because the retort houses that made gas from coal, they employed casual labour because the job was really dirty and that, but very good pay. So a lot of men would go down there and work through the winter months, and then when they started to shut the retorts down for the summer because they didn't need so many running, those men would pack up and go out like selling flowers on the streets, you know, stalls. I worked for a period of time for what they called a blending plant, which was where they mixed the different grades of tar. I actually worked in the pitch gangs, but because I was mechanically minded, I managed to get a transfer into the fitter shop, where I was in my heyday then. So that's the sort of work I enjoyed doing.
We had a job which was from Virgin Atlantic, and it was done on a conveyor belt. And when you get on a plane, you put all these gear on you, like a mask and whatever, and the stuff came down a conveyor belt, and you had to take the stuff off the conveyor belt and put it in the relevant bag. And the guy halfway down the line didn't realise that he had to keep up with the guy in front, and he picked up the mask and thought, this is good, I'll try it on. And he put the mask on and he couldn't see what he was bloody doing, and he fell over onto, didn't hurt himself, fell over onto the conveyor belt, and the conveyor belt took him down the conveyor belt with all the stuff. The stuff went everywhere. He slid off the conveyor belt and ended up in a cardboard box at the end, where at the cardboard box at the end was supposed to pack the stuff, but not him. So he technically got packed. That was very, very funny. Everybody stood about laughing, and it worked, unfortunately, that we had to, instead of going home at 3:30, we ended up going home at 4:30 because we had to pick the stuff up and pack the box. Sometimes it goes wrong. Not all the time, sometimes. And when it does go wrong, it's funny. And we don't get annoyed about it, and we don't get wound up about it. Everybody has a laugh. And that's the way we do it. You know, we don't take the the thing out of everybody, because that's not fair, because you could end up one day being like them. So it's everybody, regardless who they are, all pulling together, not only to get the product out, but to have a decent day's work, decent day's pay, and working together as a team and as a family, and it works quite well.
The company next door to Samuel Williams Main Gate had a big water tower, and it must have been 200 or 300 foot high. And sitting on top of that water tower was a little hut, and it was our foreman. He'd have to climb that 300 foot every morning to go to work, but he could see every single corner of the job. Now, if you was getting up to mischief, you knew exactly where you could be out of sight of Odgie. If you had nothing to do, you would creep away and go behind the back of the coal banks and hide up so that Odgie couldn't see that you were stationary. But he could virtually see everything. And the amount of people that was stealing, he could see what was going on in every corner of the dock. And he used to put them all away. And he would even put the loco boys away if he got the chance. We knew he was a bit of a tough lad. But he had an old Ford car, and I'm sure it was a T model. And he used to draw in of a morning, park it virtually under this hut. And if it had been raining, he would wipe the whole car down before he climbed up all them ladders. He'd come back down of a night and he'd wipe that car off again. And they tell me that he wiped it off when he got to the garage at home in Rainham. But he was in charge of us.
The manager used to sit in sort of one corner, have his desk, and it was sort of raised so he could see the whole floor. And this particular day I've been to the pictures, and a couple of the other ladies hadn't seen it, said about it and telling them all about the film. And when I got my wages at the end of the week, I was due for a rise, and the rise would have been £1, and quite looking forward to it. You know, £1 in those days was a lot of money. And when I opened my pay packet, it wasn't in it. So I asked the forelady. She said to me, the manager wants to see you. So I went over to his desk, and he said, well, there's too much chat, I'm afraid. You're not getting the rise this week. I said, I'm not saying that I wouldn't be talking, but I'm pretty sure that I was machining, because my next bundle was coming along the belt. You wouldn't be upset about £1 these days.
There was men used to do what I did during the night. 6 or 8 used to work in the night. They did a night shift, but it was always men. They were supposed to work till 7:15. I usually got in about 7 o'clock, 7:05. And they wouldn't be working. They'd all be sitting there all with their bags ready to leave at 7:15. And but I could leave work on my bay when I went home in the evening, and I think, oh, that'll be nice, that'll be finished. We might have started it, but you'd leave everything there ready. But you knew if it was one of these which was a bit awkward or took a bit more time, that they wouldn't go on it, because there wasn't as many of them as there was of the women working in there, so they could pick and choose which bay they worked on. So they didn't do the ones which, they did the easy ones. Anything which was a bit fiddly, it was still there when you came in the morning. Yeah.
There were quite a number of characters. There's one in particular, a chap called Ray Pamal, who was a mixed race. I think his father was black and his mother was white. Ray Pamal was his name. He was an interesting character. He had a great big afro hairstyle, fuzzed up like Jimi Hendrix. He wore a earring with a shark's tooth, I think it was, and all kinds of costume jewellery. He had an Afghan coat, and he was just like a wild hippie. But he was a good chemist and worked in laboratories. And at the time, he was based at Chadwell Heath, where at the time there probably weren't that many coloured people. In the offices at Stratford, probably about a dozen coloured people. On the factory floor, a few more. But there wasn't any like separation or segregation. Like I said earlier, it was a great company to work for. There was a family spirit about the place. People just mixed, and quite a number of us used to go to the pub after work, have a couple of jars before going home. And you couldn't do that if you worked with people whose company you didn't enjoy.
Something like 16,000 visitors a year used to visit the Ford Motor Company. Local students, business students, they would come to see manufacturing industry actually firsthand. My first visit to Ford's was on a guided tour from school. From Broxhill School, we went down there on an afternoon tour. We were shown the production line, how they made cars. It was very interesting to see a load of sort of raw materials coming in at one end of the factory, and just over every 60 seconds a car started off and run off the production line at the end. All gets put together like magic. And we got back into school the following morning. The teacher said, "Now look, if you don't do your exams, that's where you'll end up." Well, the atmosphere there was noisy and dusty and very hot, as you would expect from a foundry. In fact, Robbie Burns compared a foundry to hell, and he found hell to be the better place. But that was compensated by the fact that a number of people in the foundry used to have working arrangements called half hour about, and that you worked for half an hour in the heat and the dust, and you then had half an hour in the locker room. And then somebody else took over the job, and then you swapped again, and the day went very quickly with those arrangements. The noise was so loud that you had to shout to make yourself heard, and you often used to have to speak to someone's ear rather than at their face. And there are a number of pubs in the area and social clubs. One particularly stands to mind is the Mill House, which is almost opposite the foundry, still trading today. But you would recognise foundry personnel in there at the bar, because they'd be talking to one another's ears even though they're out the foundry. It was just force of habit.
There was a group of Japanese they'd come over to learn the trade, and so they went through every department from start to finish. I was given the job of getting them through what they had to learn on my part. We heard there was one occasion a man who had been a prisoner of war of the Japanese in a department they had to go through, and he literally collapsed, so the firm gave him leave until they was through his department. And then in 1956, when we was having the Suez crisis, I was training a group of Egyptians in the business. But there again, there was nothing was ever spoken about it.
We had a lady in charge of us, all the learners, and I sat down and started working, but of course as soon as you put your feet on the treadle, your foot on the treadle, away goes the needle. Down went my foot, and I wasn't quick enough to take my hand away from the needle. Needle went through my finger, and then of course I screamed out. Lady was in charge. She came running down, and she said, closed her eyes, and she said, "Oh, here we go again." And she tried to work the hand wheel slowly to get my finger out. I was crying, and of course it hurt. And then it started bleeding, and she came and bandaged it up, and we just carried on. It wasn't very good for your first day at all.
Accidents, yes, there were a few in the dock itself. We had Tommy Button. He used to grow roses. He was one of the nicest men you could ever wish. And he was walking up the gangway onto the ship, and the gangway moved and dropped, and he was thrown in the water. Now, he didn't just fall in the water, he fell on the boom, because all the outside of the jetty had all these lumps of what we call green art wood to stop the ship rubbing the concrete piles. So they used to put a wooden boom on chains down the side, and the ship would rub up against that rather than up against the jetty. And as he fell, fell half across the boom, and I don't know the exact injuries he got, but it was something to do with his head. And Joe Taylor, crane driver, he came out, he saw what had happened. He didn't even touch the side. He came down the ladder from the crane with foot each side and just skidded down and dived straight over the side, and he's pushed Tommy and laid him across the boom until they could get a crane down, but he was dead anyway. Head injuries, and that was it. But that was a very, very sad one, that one, because everybody knew Tommy Button.
Well, the tire works was really a bad place to work if you was in the yard gangs, especially the men who worked on the pitch beds, which were 6-7 foot high by 50 yards square, a solid pitch, and a machine broke here, and then men had to load it into sacks because it was sold not only to great big companies but to small businesses. If you was doing this job, you had to wear a white paste because the sun rays coming off of the pitch burnt your skin. Within a couple of days you could peel the skin off your face in sheets. That's how bad the sun affects the pitch. If you'd been working on the pitch beds all day, when you woke up in the morning at home, sometimes your eyelids were stuck together where the fine particles of pitch had still got through, and obviously the sheets on your bed would turn this dirty sulphury colour yellow, and that was coming out of your pores of your skin, the tar coming out of the pores of your skin. So it didn't matter how much you covered up.
In the early 70s I probably handled about 6 different carcinogens and substances that were subsequently banned because as research and development for one reason or another they were harmful to health. I mean, all chemicals are harmful to health, but some are worse than others. I can recall one incident where 2 workers were quite seriously overcome by fumes, solvent fumes, when cleaning out a tank. And you can imagine making industrial paints in large batches. These are huge tanks, and so the concentration of the solvent must have been quite overwhelming. I think one resulted in a fatality and the other was hospitalized, but pulled through. Obviously, and not just applied to the factory workers, but even in the laboratories and the offices, it was a very close, like a family unit. Everyone, you made good friends there. Many people found their wives and husbands there, So obviously it did have quite an effect on a number of people.
Lots of men who worked on the pitch beds got what they call pitch warts or tar warts. They're a nasty bit of goods that grow on your skin like a mole, but they are cancerous, and if you didn't have them treated, you would die in the end. They would kill you in the end. But at the time of the men when I was working there, it wasn't recognised as an industrial disease. It was only the latter years after I'd left that they finally got the unions, finally got the government to recognise that these were an industrial disease that killed. The latter years after, as soon as you got one, it was measured, and that you were sent to the Marsden Hospital at Fulham to have them burnt out, lasered out, but eventually the men got compensated. The bigger the wart, the more compensation. In my time there, I got 2 pitch warts. They were worrying, but it was part of you working there. One of our drivers had a hole in the side of his cheek that was you could lay a 50p piece in that and it would be flush with his cheek. That was how big a pitch wart would get. You know, some men died years later at home where these warts had finally come out, because your skin absorbs the tar into the pores of your skin, which made it poisonous, which made it cancerous. So yeah, it was, Ordnance Wharf was probably one of the worst places.
Becoming disabled at the age of 13, everything that I've had to do has been a fight, and work with my contemporaries, I've always found that if you can't get over your disability, you've got to find a way around it, because I regard myself the same as you. The only difference is, alright, I've got one knackered leg, but it's still me. And Remploy's had a stigma for many, many years that the people in Remploy factories, oh, don't worry about them, they're disabled, they're over there, we're over here, we're better than them. No, we're as good as them, and we're as good as everybody else. And that is why I brought in fit people into the factory as well, to work with disabled people, so that fit people could see that because you've got a bad leg or a bad arm, you're not stupid, and that disabled people can also see that there are fit people out there who are good people, and it works quite well.
My father-in-law, Bob Davis, was the works convener for East Greenwich, with roughly 2,000 men then, and as far as I know to be true, he was the first man to introduce actual unions into the gas board. They didn't like it. They tried to get rid of him through different ways, but the men threatened to go on strike if they sacked him. But he did get unions and men's rights, and he negotiated some really good rights for the men of East Greenwich Gasworks, I'm proud to say. He was a socialist. If you was active in socialism at all, you was a communist. And because he'd been to Germany and East Germany on union visits, he was called, his nickname, Red Bob. He learned the hard way and brought up and could see our men, as he saw it, really being cheated because they had no rights. And the one that he's tried to explain to me over the years was the gas board convinced the men to become co-partners, so a bit of the gasworks belonged to you, so you don't want to go on strike and don't want to cause no trouble because you're a co-partner. But that was a big con. But the unions come along and realised that this was a fallacy, and that's how it changed.
Well, the motor industry has traditionally attracted a following of people who don't work in it but wish to give advice to those that do work in it, and frequently you walked into work and there were people giving out leaflets from various left-wing groups. There was also a major person there who used to give out a newspaper called Fraud News, not Ford News, Fraud News. So there was plenty of anti-company propaganda going. Every time there was an election, certainly for a good 3-4 weeks before polling day, we would get local politicians turning up with a soapbox at lunchtime, because in those days we had the traditional lunch hour, and this was a good place for politicians to literally stand on the soapbox and try and garner votes. Bernadette McAlasky, who found fame as Bernadette Devlin, then the youngest Member of Parliament at Westminster, she gave a talk at lunchtime in support of troops out of Northern Ireland, and that was full to standing room only, and like most politicians she was a trifle verbose and went on over her allotted time by somewhat, but people were so magnetised that they very few left, and quite a few stayed, and quite a few got in trouble for being back at work, because as you know, the principle with a moving production line, you only need one person missing and you can't run the line, because you can't run the line because that person's part isn't being put into the product. So but Bernadette McAlasky certainly drew in the crowds.
We had a sports day every year, donkey rides, coconut shies. Half the guys out of the loco department used to play cricket and football, but we were all pretty swift on our feet because we had to run in front of the loco, and we used to win all the running races. Yeah, well, they were doing it all day long. In fact, when I sat back and worked out what I used to do as a shunter with the loco, I was running in front of that loco perhaps 6 or 7 hours a day, and I'm perhaps doing 20 or 30 mile a day running. You know, I was as fit as a flea. I had a couple of little punch-ups down there and all, because with loco boys it was all rough and ready, and you get in the lobby on a wet day because the dockers refused to work in the rain. So you might get I've known it raining for a week, so you didn't go out. And there we are, all stuck in the lobby. They were all playing cards, and then somebody would dip their finger in the tea and flick it over the bloke next to him. And but, you know, it was part of life, you know.
The sports days took place on a Saturday, Sundays, and it involved not only East Greenwich gasworks, but all the London gasworks were involved as well, being Croydon and Old Kent Road. When you think like Harvey's, Johnson Phillips, the British Rope Works, the UGB, United Glass Bottle Makers, all had sports grounds. Siemens had a big sports ground, so the gasworks was exceptional. Tennis, football, cricket, bowls, rifle shooting, target golf, and you all turned up on the day and you had a full sports day of racing and chasing, and me and my wife actually entered in the sack race, which we won, and also we defended that title for 3 years, unbeaten. My only championship that I ever won, but we retired undefeated. We were both fit and healthy in them days, so yeah, we just managed to hit it off. We jumped in our sack and we jumped perfect, and if you can do it, you win. But say we done it 3 times, 3 years running, so they used to say, oh no, look, they're entering, you ain't got a lot of chance to win this race. But we did do it. My wife was proud of that.
My aunt who worked there, she was in the purchasing department. She worked there for donkey's years. She did nearly 40 years in the Standard. They used to have a dinner and dance. So me and my husband, she always used to get tickets for us, you know, and you would have a lovely evening, a lovely dinner and a dance. Where we lived in Custom House, there was a big working men's club in the same road, and there was always a dance up there which was open even if you weren't a member. That was where I first met him, really. I used to go with a girlfriend and he would be with his older friends, because he was 7 years older than me, but he'd come up to the other end of the hall and ask me to dance. He always had a white folded handkerchief in his pocket so that when he asked anybody to dance, he had that on his hand against your back. Oh yeah, quick steps, foxtrots, tangos, waltzes. Yeah, his favourite was a quick step. Yeah.
I was called up at 18 and I had to go to a place in Stratford, and a lot of girls there. They really wanted you in the ATS. You know, they spoke about that. I definitely did not want to wear a uniform, and I didn't want to go away from home. And then I thought about the Land Army. I reckon I could look good in that hat. And the uniform came, couldn't wait to put it on. I tried the hat on different angles, which would suit me. And my mum said, "You go down and show your dad. He wants to see you, I know." And down I went, and there were, it wasn't packed, but there were quite a few people in the pub. And I sort of opened the door and walked in, and well, there was just a cheer went up, all remarks were, "Doesn't it suit her? Great, it looks great." And my dad struck up, somebody was on the piano, and they started playing this song, for it was Mary, I can't sing, Mary, lame as any name can be. And everybody was round me. You'd have thought I was going out and win the war for them. I was going in the Land Army. There was all this cheering and how well she looked, and I really did like the uniform, but I never did get the whipcord trousers. It was just one of these things, you either got it in whipcord or you got it in, but I never did.
When one of the men was retiring, he would walk through the full length of the workshop. All the men involved were banging whatever they could with hammers on metal, and it was called by everybody like he was being banged out. Very emotional, seen men in tears, but excellent to be there, be one of them.
Well, it's very sad. The Ford Motor Company used to make two vehicles, a Sierra and a Fiesta. And when the Sierra came to the end of its road, Dagenham was expected to be making its replacement, the Mondeo, and we were told that the Mondeo would not be made at Dagenham. And finally, they then switched from having a day and night shift, 2 shifts to 1, and then finally that 1 shift was finished, and Dagenham ceased making cars, and the cars that Dagenham made were transferred to be made in Cologne. So sadly that was the end of Dagenham as a car producing plant, but it also cost a lot of business locally. For example, the seats were made by a supplier called Johnson Controls, and of course there was no requirement for them. A lot of the products were sourced locally, and of course none of these places had the sort of payouts that Ford's got. Many of them didn't even have a union. So it was a sad day, really.
The company used to have what they called a quarter century club. So when you reached 25 years service, you got a gold watch, and there was an annual dinner dance. So I got my gold watch in 1994. The company eventually got taken over by an American company called DuPont, but it was still very, very sad because many people like myself had been there for decades. A number of cases where families worked there. You know, so you'd have 3 generations of the same family being employed at Chadwell Heath. So it was sad when that happened. The thing I liked most about going to work was the people, because I've never experienced it, but I can't imagine anything worse than going into a workplace where you don't get on with the people or don't like them. And like I said, I worked in several different departments. I think I had 11 different jobs. and thoroughly enjoyed every one of them. I can honestly say I enjoyed all 36 years of my working life. No, I honestly can't think of anything I disliked. Honestly, it might seem strange to you, but I cannot think of anything I disliked.
I was still working in the tar works when North Sea gas was discovered. It went all over the country, you know, we were going to be self-sufficient, didn't have to rely on anybody else. All the country got free gas fittings, so we would burn this new gas, but it actually put the gas workers in East Greenwich and Croydon and Old Kent Road, started to put a lot of us out of work. We thought I had a job for life then, but someone drilled an hole in the North Sea, natural gas come along, and we was all slowly made redundant. That was progress. My two boys virtually grew up over on the Gasworks sports ground. We had hours and hours of fun over there. So yeah, I miss that. I miss all that when it all started to go wrong and they sold up the ground, and now you've got Sainsbury's and Comet, bus routes, because Greenwich Gasworks was, I think it was 83 acres it covered. It's a big plot of ground. All gone. Another era. We're into a new era. So, yeah, I do miss it though.